join me in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I pray that you bless not only the words that are read and spoken, but also that are heard and felt, and that in all ways that we honor the risen Christ. Amen. This morning our scripture is going to come from two chapters of John, chapter 7, and we're going to read a little verse in chapter 8. John chapter 7, I'm going to read 1 through 10. After this, Jesus traveled throughout Galilee. He didn't want to travel in Judea because the Jewish authorities wanted to kill him. When it was almost time for the Jewish festival of booths, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee, go to Judea, so your disciples can see the amazing works that you can do. Those who want to be known publicly don't do things secretly. Since you can do these things, show yourself to the world." His brothers said this because even they didn't believe in him. Jesus replied, "For you, any time is fine, but my time hasn't come yet. The world can't hate you. It hates me, though, because I testify that its works are evil. You go up to the festival. I'm not going to this one because my time hasn't yet come." Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers left for the festival, he went too, not openly, but in secret. And then in John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus spoke to the people again, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." This morning we're going to talk about light. Or for a little icebreaker, does anybody here know how many evangelists it takes to change a light bulb? Only one, but the bulb must repent of its darkness and be willing to change. How many Presbyterians does it take? None. God has predestined when the lights will be on and off. How many Roman Catholics will it take to change a light bulb? None. They use candles. How many disciples of Christ does it take to change a light bulb? Undetermined. Whether your light is bright, dull, or completely out, you are loved. Bring a bulb of your choice to the Sunday lighting service and a covered dish to pass. And how many TV evangelists does it take to change a light bulb? One. But for the message of light to continue, send in your donation today. This morning we're going to talk about light. Jesus says, "I am the light." Light's a common theme in the Bible. We talked about this a little bit during the Advent season. We talked about, if you just take the bookends, for example, in Genesis, one of the first things God does, we're told that this earth was void. There was like an emptiness or a nothingness. And God came and spoke existence and said, "Let there be light." If you look at the end of the bookend in Revelation, we're told about this new heaven and new earth, and there's going to be no need for light because Jesus will be the light. It's almost in a sense that when God comes on scene, light, it moves from darkness to light. Whenever God comes on scene. So this morning we're going to talk a little bit about the context, though, of when Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." We're going to dive in a little deeper, though, this morning here. And the reason I talked about John chapter 7, I read that first chapter 7, even though Jesus doesn't say that till chapter 8, is I want to give you a little context of when Jesus actually says perhaps what he said. Jesus was attending the Feast of Booths. Some say this was the Feast of Tabernacles. It was celebrated in the fall. It was celebrated in the fall to remember the Israelites wandering around in the wilderness. You remember those 40 years we're told they were wandering around, and each year we're told that people were to build booths. So they were called in Hebrew sukkos to build. See, they were in the wilderness when they traveled. Basically, they had these kind of like tents. They would get a set up, and then they would get it taken down so they can continue on traveling. But during the wilderness years, they needed that temporary shelter so they could take it down and move on really quickly. However, We're told now, though, in Scripture, later on in Deuteronomy, we're actually told that when the people got to the Promised Land, they were still supposed to celebrate, have this festival of booths or tabernacles to remember this experience. So for 7 days, they were to build these sukkots, these tents like the structure, and live in them. So they could remember this experience. And by the way, this is actually still practiced today. So what's the significance of this? Why would God want them to remember being in the wilderness with these tents that you put up and put down? Think about that question for a minute. And what I kind of came up with, I think God wants them to remind them that all of life's a pilgrimage. It's constantly a journey. I mean, sure, while the Israelites were in the wilderness, at one point they would finally make it to the Promised Land. They were finally going to head to someplace better, a place where there would be no more shelter. They wouldn't have to do temporary shelter, a place where they didn't have to count on manna and quail. They could finally set down some roots to sit down, maybe build something. They could finally have a time in their life to say, we have arrived. We have made it. Does anybody know what that feeling is like? Some of you, probably most of you know, I was farmer, raised, born, baptized, you name it, in the United Methodist Church. Started off there. And I know what it's like constantly having to move every 2-3 years, especially early in your ministry. And I didn't live in a Sukkot, but I lived in something called a church parsonage. Time after time after time. And I remember when I saw the light and came over to the disciples, I got to do something kind of the unfathomable. I got to purchase a house. I never dreamed of doing this, at least maybe to my 40th year of ministry when I know I'm going to be there to retire maybe. But here I was purchasing a house. I finally arrived perhaps. And yet what I had to learn, house or no house, pointed to churches or not, life is still a journey. Perhaps the Israelites needed to know that. Perhaps I still need to know that. Perhaps each one of us need to know that. In fact, maybe you could even go on to say, maybe arrival is even just a myth. Think about that. I mean, aren't we constantly journeying in our faith? Aren't we constantly, like to say, works in progress? We're never quite there yet. And even for the Israelites, when they finally made it to the Promised Land, they'd be so tempted to say, we made it there. But that would not yet be their final destination. And I think even more so, each one of us needs to know that. And just think about what it means that this world is a pilgrimage or a journey. For some of us, we can say, that's a relief. Because I'm going through some really dark and some spotty times right now in my life. I can't take it where I'm at right now. And guess what? You're not at your final destination. So there's good news for you. But what about some of us maybe who are only overly optimistic and life couldn't be much better than Southwest sunny Florida? But even for those of you, in fact, one of my friends sitting here, I remember someone asked him, are you a snowbird or not? And this person replied back, no, I moved here. You'd have to drag me back to New York caveman style. And I agree. But even for those of us who just love it, it's like paradise. This is not our final destination. We're still not there yet. So God had to remind the Israelites that sometimes they're stopping places, that their stopping places were not their staying places. And does anybody know why the Israelites knew that? While their stopping places weren't their staying places, because God provided them with two pillars. A pillar during the day, a cloud during the day, and at night, if you go back in the Exodus, you can read about this pillar of fire at night. So basically, whenever they saw this pillar, they knew it was time to move. They knew God was on the move, and they knew they had to move with God. Their journey to follow God. And later, when the Israelites would make it to the Promised Land, once again, when they'd be tempted to say, we made it, we have arrived, there would be this temptation to say, well, okay, God, we made it now. We don't need you. We don't need your guidance. Thank you for your blessings, but I'm good now. But I think perhaps that's why God created this festival of the booths or tabernacles, to remind them, even when you think you've arrived, you haven't really arrived yet. Even when you think you made it, you're still going to need my guidance at that point. But this wasn't the case. Like I said, God kept having this festival for them because they knew they needed to be led. And I think this is important because no matter where you find yourself on a journey, we still have to ask God daily, God, where do you want to lead me? Have you ever thought about asking that question in the morning? Lately I've been doing that with my Lenten devotion. I have one in the morning, one at night. I come in the sanctuary on Monday mornings around 10 to 8 o'clock, and I just say, God, how do you want to use me? How do you want to use my hands, my mind, my thoughts, my feet today? Have you ever thought about waking up each day, laying on your bed, Wanda sipping your coffee, and say, God, how do you want to use me? And by the way, some scholars think, though I say all this to get to the point where a lot of scholars think that it was the day of this festival, the opening day, is when Jesus would have went on and said, I am the light of the world. It's that opening day that was called the Grand Illumination. It was this huge celebration, dancing from nighttime to all the way to the daytime. Giant torches were lit. You could see all of Jerusalem, and all the courtyard of the temple was burned so brightly that you could see all of Jerusalem. And it's here that Jesus would stand up in the midst of everyone and say, I am the light of the world. And I think Jesus was saying that for those who understand life as a journey, for those who seek light and direction through all life's stopping places, you know what? I still want to be your pillar today. Still let me lead you today. So how might this work in our everyday lives? What does it mean for Christ to lead us, to be that light? Think about the old story, I'm sure you heard it, the old flashlight, how it works. If you were camping, let's say you had to use the restroom in the evening, you go to the cabin, you took the flashlight out, you pointed to the cabin, chances are, unless you bought a very expensive flashlight, it's not going to reach to the cabin where you're needing to go. But instead, you use the flashlight just so you can take the next couple of steps. And I think that's a lot how Jesus works. You know, so often we want to know where the destination is. We want God to light up the entire campground, don't we? But God just gives us the next couple of steps. And we have to trust Him each and every day. Day after day after day. We talked about last week a little bit about when the Israelites were in the wilderness, and remember that God provided manna, but what? Just enough for each day. And they had to trust that God would provide for them the next day. And then when they got to the next day, they could take enough, but one caveat, only for that day. And once again, they would have to trust. And, you know, it could be scary following this life because, you don't ultimately know where it's going to lead sometimes. But if you remember that life's a journey and not a destination, and if you let Christ determine when you're there. So maybe instead of focusing on our destination always, instead we just follow the lights. And I think when you follow the light, you might be surprised where you'll end up. For some of us here, maybe this Lenten season, following the light, maybe God asking you to take a step toward reconciliation. I'm a basic, simple God, but basically a fancy word for forgiveness. Maybe something in this season of your life right now, it's time to forgive someone, something that happened, whether it was yesterday or 5 years ago. It's time to let the grudge, the resentment go. Maybe that could be a way of following the light right now. Maybe following the light could be maybe deepening our discipleship. Maybe that could be joining a study. Maybe that can mean actually, if you don't give to the church, to start giving. And if you do give, maybe it's time to not put a little, but maybe it's time to put a percentage in. Maybe following the light is actually serving, following a new way to serve. Maybe it's actually being risky in our service. Remember, in going out of our comfort zone. Remember our working definition I read a couple weeks ago about a Jewish rabbi. He actually said that I am could be translated as I will be there, however soever I will be there. Remember, more important than God giving you courage, God giving you some blessing, is knowing that God is right by your side. And I think when we know God's by our side, when we follow the lights, Jesus always constantly moves us beyond ourselves out into the world. You notice that when you really follow God closer, you tend to go from your inward thinking about yourself, your prayers can go from yourself to others. Someone from the church who I respect asked me to share how much our church gives outside of what we set outside for our budget for outreach. Because this person knows how generous this church is. And I told him I would share this at our annual congregational meeting. Here's just a quick survey. From the different disciple special offerings, we give around $2,657. Our Guardian Angel Fund, by the way, this is to help those in need, we collect about $727. Our United Way book, our book fundraiser last year, we collected 101 books. You could Google how much an average book was, and you can calculate the cost from there. But we collected 101 books, and some of this stuff I don't think can actually go to dollar amounts, but it really goes down to how many people you are impacting their lives, these children. So let's just keep that in mind. Right now, by the way, that fundraiser is going on for this year. So let's beat it. There you go, Shanna. School supplies. This past year, we collected 24 school bags. And not only that, we had an additional about $125 for school supplies. If you remember, a year before that, we did even something perhaps even cooler yet. We really got exhausted for our church. But we had a fundraiser here where we invited teachers to come here and actually shop. Our Thanksgiving turkeys this past year, instead of actually purchasing turkeys, we just collected money for turkeys. And we collected $460 worth of turkeys, and in addition to that, we had 4 full bags of groceries that we gave out for toppings and mashed potatoes, and you name it. Our Christmas shoe boxes, the last 2 years we've been doing shoe boxes. We had 27 shoe boxes. We also gave to 2 large families. We raised $800 during Christmas. Our Veterans Bus Passes, y'all recall this, we had our gift auction. We raised $1,000. I was informed that bus tickets cost about $4 each. Do the math, we made 200, we ought to have 250 bus passes for our veterans. Our community garden, and Dan Lewis from the food pantry, he estimated that we give away about 50 pounds every Tuesday worth of veggies. Keep in mind, we do this for about 6 months of the year. So around 300 pounds of vegetables and lettuce and you name it. And each week, once again, we get to the food pantry. You know who you are. You come every week and you throw in, you buy Publix and you throw in an extra box of cereal here. Every week, we probably give away about 2 groceries worth to the food pantry, giving us about 104 perhaps bags each year. Friends, let us continue to follow Jesus. Jesus is the light. Let us remember that he always leads us beyond ourselves, and that more than Jesus giving us a dose of courage, know that he goes with us. Amen? Amen. This time I'm going to invite you, if you are able, to stand for our closing hymn. You can find hymn number 346, Where He Leads Me. At the end of the last verse, if you wish to make this your home church, you're welcome to come up at the end, and I will pray with you, and you can join the church. Let us stand.